something that is explained in its simplest terms and yet explains fully what is being said is the best way. So I always liked the idea of poetry because I was using Occam's razor to explain an idea, because I was trying to put it in its simplest terms, its most concise terms, and when it rhymes like that, it just all fit together for me in that way. So I use both the idea of rhythm and rhyme and also parsimony in writing my poetry.
Yeah, and so I know you've written some other books too. Do you want to tell us about those and how everything fits together?
Yeah, basically I've written 3 books now. The first one was Gibberrishi's Profound Rhymes. The second one, Gibberishi's Rhymes to Contemplate. And the third one, While the Gibberishi Rhymes, His Bed Burns. All these focus on basically the same context, and what it does is try to give a very practical application to spiritual ideas about life. And of course, they're all done in rhyme. So they all are 3 books that are basically dealing with how we look at life, that is looking at it from a perspective that will advance us into a new way of being and a new way of living our lives.
Yeah, which is, I mean, the key, right? It's the key. And I think nothing has been more obvious in that how much we need that in our own lives in the past couple of years. And I know everybody, it seems like a lot of people I talk to where everyone feels a little bit lost still, or a little bit unclear on, after everything that happened in the past 2 years, where do I go from here? And I love this reminder of what you're talking about with this, to be our best spiritual self. And it doesn't have to be complicated and long, 1,000 pages books, right? You can make it the ideas that people need and make it simple and easy to remember.
Yeah, because my whole life of spirituality has been what I would call practical, because just to sit around and talk about ideas does nothing. You have to realize that we're responsible for making certain steps. And really, those steps really are most importantly, if looked at from thought first. In other words, the thoughts that we put into the collective have a significant impact on everybody. We could be sitting in our room by ourselves and thinking these most courageous and wonderful thoughts about the world, and those thoughts will do as much as the actions that people take in resisting things that they don't like. Because it's thoughts with which we create. And that's we need to understand that our actions are based on our thoughts. And if they're not for the well-being of all, and they're only serving a few, that's not being of service to yourself or anyone else, really.
Right, and I love that reminder. And as really what we've talked about is that one of the key points that I got from this conversation is how we have the power. We have the power to respond. We have the power over our thoughts. We don't have to let our thoughts just be run wild in such a negative way as most people are used to experiencing. And there is another way. There is another way to experience life. And I think your books give us that even especially for somebody maybe new to this topic of spirituality or wanting to improve themselves, gives you a different way to look at things. And especially if it's in an easy to remember format, as we were talking about that rhythmic and poetic format, it's amazing what I found in my life. It's amazing how quickly things can change when you start to go down this path.
Yes, and also, if people need to take a larger perspective on life, which I really believe that spirituality offers. And what I mean by that is that you look at an iceberg, and what you see is a very small percentage of that iceberg, isn't it? That's what the material world is. The material world is that what we're seeing of that iceberg, and how much of that iceberg is out of sight. So much more of our world is beyond our current vision. So that's the portion of the world that really is controlling what we see. But we have a tendency to totally ignore that, because science says, well, if I can't see it and I can't study it and I can't analyze it, it's not valuable. It has no worth. It has no meaning. But this happens to be who we are. We are the invisible inside our own bodies, but we are the most important thing to the operation of this body. And once this body no longer serves us, it's dropped and we take another body if that's our choice.
Right. Yes, this is such a fascinating topic to me. I could talk to you for hours about this, but we're coming up on our time. So, Paul, I want to thank you for joining us today and being our guest on Books on Air.
My pleasure, and Shirley.
Before we close out today, just one last question for you. What do you hope the readers learn or take away after reading your book?
I guess the most important thing is that people need to realize that they are the most important person in their life, and how they respect themselves and how they feel about themselves and the world is what they are showing everybody else by the way they act. So the better people feel about themselves, the more they love themselves, the more they will radiate that energy to themselves and the world, and that will help change them and the world, and they'll be the example to show other people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thought. Thank you, Paul, again for joining us. It's been an amazing conversation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
My guest today has been Paul Naragon, author of the book, Gibberishi's Rhymes to Contemplate, Poetic Verse Moving You into a New Life. And you can find more about his book on Amazon, and I'll link to the book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.